It was the height of Oktoberfest in Leavenworth, Washington, a small, Bavarian-themed town nestled in the Cascade Mountains. Every year, this picturesque village exploded with life as tourists from all over the world gathered to celebrate. The streets were lined with wooden alpine chalets, decorated with flowers and flags. Later hosen-clad men and women in dirndls filled the beer gardens, where the air was thick with the smell of roasting bratwurst and the sound of polka bands. For the townspeople and tourists, Oktoberfest was a time of joy, laughter, and indulgence. Dark beer flowed freely, and everyone joined in the festivities, raising their steins to toast one another in camaraderie. But this year, there was a sense of excitement in the air, one that had nothing to do with beer or music. Unbeknownst to the revelers, something ancient and dangerous was watching from the forests. High in the surrounding mountains, a group of Bigfoots, massive, shaggy, and silent, had been observing the human festival for days. Drawn by the loud sounds and the scent of meat roasting over open flames, the Bigfoots had grown curious. But curiosity quickly turned to hunger and aggression. The humans, with their loud machines and endless noise, had encroached too far into the wild. It was time for the Bigfoots to remind them who truly ruled the forests. The largest of the group, a hulking Bigfoot standing nearly 10 feet tall, snarled to the others, and they began their descent into the valley, their massive forms blending into the shadows of the trees. Tonight, they would attack the humans, feast on their food, and reclaim the forest that had been disturbed by their incessant celebrations. As the sun set behind the mountains, the town of Leavenworth glowed under the golden lights strung across its streets. The beer gardens were packed, the clinking of steins and the hearty laughter of the crowd echoing off the surrounding hills. Carl, the burly owner of one of the town's most popular beer halls, stood behind the bar, wiping his hands on his apron and keeping an eye on the crowd. His wife, Marta, handed out steaming plates of bratwurst and sauerkraut to hungry customers. Everything seemed normal until a loud crash interrupted the revelry. People turned toward the edge of the beer garden, where a group of tourists, in the middle of taking selfies, had suddenly scattered in fear. Something huge was moving at the edge of the festival grounds, just beyond the line of trees that bordered the town. The dark shape loomed in the distance, its glowing eyes fixated on the crowd. At first, no one believed it. They thought it was a joke, perhaps someone dressed as a bear or a Halloween prank come early. But as the creature stepped into the light, the laughter died. It was a Bigfoot. Towering over the crowd, the creature let out a deep, guttural roar, sending the tourists scrambling for safety. But before the crowd could fully process what they were seeing, two more Bigfoots emerged from the shadows, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. A moment of stunned silence hung in the air. Then chaos erupted. People screamed and ran in every direction, knocking over tables and chairs in their panic. The Bigfoots, emboldened by the fear they had caused, began to advance on the beer garden, their eyes scanning the crowd for easy prey. The largest of the creatures snatched a whole barrel of beer, tearing it open with its claws and letting the liquid splash across the ground. Another Bigfoot swiped at the food stand, sending bratwurst flying through the air. Carl, who had witnessed the chaos unfold from behind his bar, slammed his fist on the counter. His face turned red with anger. "Das ist nicht möglich," he bellowed in German, his voice booming over the panicked crowd. "They dare to attack us during Oktoberfest?" Fueled by a sudden surge of adrenaline and more than a few pints of dark Bavarian beer, Carl leaped over the bar and grabbed the large wooden mallet he used to tap kegs. The sight of the creatures ransacking his beloved beer hall was more than he could stand. "Loot! To me!" Carl shouted, rallying the remaining townsfolk and tourists who had not yet fled. "We will not let these beasts ruin our festival." Marta, ever the practical one, grabbed a large cast-iron skillet from the kitchen and joined her husband, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. "We've fought off worse than this," she said, her voice steely with determination. "Remember that time the festival ran out of bratwurst? This is nothing." A handful of the more intoxicated patrons, emboldened by Carl's rallying cry, stumbled toward him, armed with whatever they could find, chairs, steins, and even sausages. A particularly burly man in tight lederhosen grabbed a giant pretzel from his table and raised it like a shield. "Let's show these monsters what Oktoberfest is made of," he slurred. From the crowd, a group of tourists who had come for the beer but stayed for the chaos also stepped forward. Some grabbed wooden benches, while others wielded their heavy beer steins like weapons. A group of younger hikers, dressed in matching neon windbreakers, grabbed sturdy hiking poles, ready to defend their evening's fun. The Bigfoots, sensing resistance, roared and charged the makeshift army. The townspeople and tourists braced themselves for the onslaught, the sweet taste of beer and bratwurst still fresh in their mouths. The first Bigfoot reached the front line of defenders, its massive hands swiping down at Carl. But Carl, surprisingly nimble for his size, dodged the attack and swung his wooden mallet with all his might. The mallet connected with the creature's knee, eliciting a pained grunt from the beast. "Not in my town!" Carl shouted, swinging again. Behind him, Marta was a whirlwind of fury. She swung her cast-iron skillet with expert precision, delivering a blow to the snout of another Bigfoot that left the creature howling in pain. "You think you can just waltz in here and take our bratwurst?" she snarled. "Think again." The battle quickly turned into a chaotic brawl. Townspeople and tourists fought side by side, their drunken bravery lending them strength as they threw themselves at the attacking Bigfoots. One man, still clutching his giant pretzel shield, managed to dodge a swipe from a smaller Bigfoot and bash it over the head with a stein full of beer. The creature, dazed and confused, stumbled back into the trees. A group of hikers armed with their poles managed to trip another Bigfoot, sending it crashing to the ground, where a swarm of angry festival-goers descended on it with fists, feet, and makeshift weapons. The Bigfoots, though powerful and fearsome, had underestimated the sheer drunken determination of the Oktoberfest crowd. Fueled by dark beer and righteous fury, the townspeople and tourists fought with an almost reckless abandon. Their tight-fitting lederhosen and dirndls only added to their resolve, as they fought not just for survival, but for the pride of their beloved festival. The largest Bigfoot, seeing its comrades overwhelmed, let out an ear-piercing roar and charged toward the center of the beer garden, where Carl and Marta stood. With a single swipe of its massive hand, it sent a group of defenders flying, their weapons clattering to the ground. For a moment, it seemed like the beast would win. But just as the Bigfoot raised its arm to strike Carl, something incredible happened. One of the more creative townspeople, a local butcher named Hans, had an idea. He grabbed the biggest bratwurst he could find, an enormous, coiled sausage the length of a small car, and, with the help of a few others, he flung it toward the charging Bigfoot. The bratwurst struck the creature in the face, wrapping around its head and momentarily blinding it. The Bigfoot roared in frustration, its massive hands fumbling to tear the sausage free, but the greasy, slippery bratwurst made it impossible to get a grip. Carl saw his chance. With a mighty war cry, he swung his mallet one last time, delivering a blow to the Bigfoot's midsection that sent it crashing to the ground. The remaining Bigfoots, seeing their leader fall, hesitated. The townspeople and tourists, emboldened by their victory, surged forward in a final push, driving the creatures back into the forest. As the last of the Bigfoots disappeared into the darkness, the crowd erupted into cheers. People raised their steins high, toasting their victory over the fearsome creatures. The adrenaline of the battle began to wear off, and the revelers returned to their tables, some nursing bruises, others proudly displaying trophies, a tuft of fur here, a shattered stein there. Carl stood tall, his mallet resting on his shoulder, while Marta wiped sweat from her brow and gave him a knowing look. "Well," she said, "that was certainly one for the history books." Hans, the butcher, still holding the remnants of the bratwurst that had saved the day, grinned. "I always knew my sausages were legendary," he said. The beer gardens were quickly restored, tables were set back up, and the polka band, which had cowered in the corner during the fight, resumed their music. Oktoberfest continued well into the night, the victory over the Bigfoots becoming the stuff of legend. From that day on, the townspeople of Leavenworth would tell the story of the great Oktoberfest brawl of 1985, how, fueled by dark beer, strong bratwurst, and sheer Bavarian stubbornness, they had driven off the Bigfoots and saved their beloved festival. And as for the Bigfoots, they would never again dare to set foot in Leavenworth during Oktoberfest.